I'm speaking with David Arnold, author of The Electric Kingdom, published by Viking Books for Young Readers, February 9th, 2021. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So first, and I know you've been asked some of these questions before, so I'll try to make it a little different.
No,
Um,
it's no problem.
so considering all the ideas that a writer has rolling around in their head, and I see that you haven't written science fiction before. You've written more, I guess, grounded in reality, some magical realism there. Um, but how did this idea rise above the rest that are fighting and uh, and get written now?
Yeah, it's I have a lot of author friends who have a bunch of ideas all at once, and they kind of can cherry pick the best one for for however they're feeling. And if one's not working, they just kind of push it to the side and use a different one. And I've never had that luxury. It's never been my process. I usually only have one or maybe two ideas at a time.
Mm,
So I find myself in a position often where um, have to make something work. As a working writer, I do write every day, and it's my livelihood and my job. And so if something's not working, I have to make it work.
mhm,
um, I will say with the Electric Kingdom, that was always, or since 2013, that has been that I said one or two ideas. The Electric Kingdom was always that second idea in line. It kind of was always on the back burner. I first had the idea for the book back in early, it would have been early 2013. I was taking care of my then newborn son or 6 month old son. I was
mhm,
a stay at home dad when he was a little baby. And I was working on my first novel, Mosquito Land, at the time, and
mhm,
had this image for a book that would with a family who lived in a boarded up farmhouse in the woods of New Hampshire, and I had no idea who that family was or why the farmhouse was boarded up or what. And that's kind of where it started. And then over time, it was always on the back burner. As I said, it was never the main story. But I would have ideas, and I would just kind of go dump them in the folder. I
mhm.
just had this sort of folder dump. And I would continue to drop ideas into it over the years. And I'll tell you, it's been interesting having the idea when my son was that young.
Mhm.
It published this February, and he'll be 9 in May. So it's an interesting trajectory to watch the book having kind of grown up
Mhm.
parallel to my kid. There's almost like a tangible passage of time that I've seen take place in front of my eyes every day in my house. And it's just an odd thing to have an idea that started when he started
Mhm.
and to only now be finished. But it's been very rewarding, and yeah, it's been a really interesting process for sure.
Is the book, so my next question is usually, tell me about the protagonist, setting, conflict of the book. Is it connected to your son's birth in some way or
That's an interesting question. And I would have said for the majority of the process of writing it, that no, it really wasn't. But as the book started coming together, I don't know, probably around. So I turned to it and kind of got serious about it in early 2017 is when it kind of became my main project and the main thing that I was like, okay, the time is now. The time I'm ready to tackle this. And so yeah, I don't know, maybe a year or somewhere down the line, as it was starting to come together, I realized ultimately what the book is about is a father wanting to protect his child
Mhm.
and wanting to spare that child pain and suffering, and in the book even death itself. And I think as a parent, and you know I certainly can relate to that. And it is interesting though, authors who accidentally write about things. It's we think we're writing about something, and then later on in the process, you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, maybe that's really what I was writing about actually.
Mhm.
Um, so yes, I think it's a long-winded
Huh.
version of yes.
So then tell me about the book. Does it still have the boarded up, the family boarded up, in the
Yeah,
house?
yeah, it does. So it's I'll give a quick kind of synopsis of it. You've got the main character Nico, who lives with her ailing father in a boarded up farmhouse in the woods of New Hampshire.
Mhm.
The book opens roughly 20 years after the end of the world, basically, and he's sick and potentially dying of the same thing that has recently killed her mother,
Mhm.
and sort of in a mental haze, he tells her that this story that he's told her her whole life, basically, that there are pieces of that story that are true.
Mhm.
Um, and in the story, there's this mythical portal, and he tells her that this thing is real and that she needs to go find it. He kind of outlines a map for her to set off and find this mythical portal, which may or may not be there.
Mhm.
But it's very clear in the book that the father is dying, and if she stays, she very likely will as well. So
Mhm.
so that's Nico, and she kind of sets off toward to try to find this portal. And then meanwhile, you've got 12-year-old Kit, who wants nothing more than to paint and hug his mom. And he kind of sees the world in this very pure and innocent way. But also, it was, he, as a 12-year-old born well after the apocalypse,
Mhm.
all he knows of the world is this mountain town that he's been raised in with his mom and his two adopted siblings. And
Mhm.
everything he knows about what the world used to be is through books and or through his mom. And so that was a really interesting character to write.
Mhm.
um, and things, without giving spoilers, things conspire to kind of set Kit and his adopted siblings off on their own sort of quest to find a settlement that they've heard on the radio. And
Mhm.
so then Nico and Kit's stories kind of come together, and then lastly you've got this really enigmatic is the word we use. It's what makes the book more sci-fi. I think it's what gives it the sci-fi spin. There's a character called the Deliverer who lives in a house on top of a mountain, and
Mhm.
who is omnipotent and omniscient and is able to be in certain places at certain times to make things happen. And we're not really sure who the Deliverer is or what's going on with that character until all three stories kind of come together in the end.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
it's and again, I don't want you to give away anything, but
Mhm.
it's interesting with the book classified as sci-fi, readers are going to expect, they're going to think, because you have some mysteries in here that may or may not exist. And when readers say, "Oh, I'm reading a sci-fi book," they're going to expect something, but the way you described it, it could easily be simply a post-apocalyptic novel about the real world in the future without other fantastic elements.
Absolutely. And some of my favorite stories are ones that you can't quite define in terms of a genre. And um, I walked into a movie theater in 2015 to see what I thought was an alien movie, and I left a completely different person. And that movie was Arrival.
Mhm.
And that was basically a turning point for me. And think, I mean, I think prior to that movie, I would have said I wasn't a big fan of sci-fi.
Mhm.
But then I saw that movie, and it was almost like, Eric Heiser is the one who adapted it, but it's based on the brilliant short story by Ted Chiang.
Mhm.
Um, eh, Ted Chiang's work, the movie Arrival, plenty of other movies and books that I've discovered since then have led me to realize I actually do like sci-fi. I didn't know what sci-fi could be. I kind of thought sci-fi was one thing,
Mhm.
and it's really not. And that really opened a lot of doors for me and what was possible in my own storytelling. Things that can be grounded in mostly reality, but have sort of sci-fi twists. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, I know. I rarely think about genre or age groups or anything when I'm writing a book. I really just I want to try to tell the most interesting story that I can.
Mhm.
And this was definitely a turn for me in terms of, as you said. I mean, my first two books are completely realistic, and my third one has a speculative angle to it.
Mhm.
But this one was a definite pivot. But it was very challenging and very rewarding in so many ways. Um, and yeah, I'm okay with not being able to quite define it.
Yeah. Are you familiar? Have you come across the Soviet director Andrei Tarkovsky? He does he does
Uh,
sci-fi, but in a sort of
tell me something that he's done. The name sounds very familiar.
Stalker. He did, I believe, did he do Solaris, the original Solaris? He might have.
Okay, I think maybe that's okay. I need to, yeah. And I still feel like a baby in sci-fi world. Like there's all these, people that I haven't discovered yet. But the
Mhm.
name definitely rings a bell for sure. I just finished the Three Body Problem, the second half of 2020, and just that trilogy just absolutely blew my mind. And yeah,
Mhm.
but I do feel like a baby in the genre for sure.
Well, having read the descriptions of your other books, that's why Andrei Tarkovsky jumped to mind, because the feel of his films almost feels like what I'm feeling from the description of your books. So I just see
Okay,
a connection there.
yeah.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, I'll
Um,
definitely have to check him out.
I'm speaking with David Arnold, author of The Electric Kingdom. You can find more information about his work at davidarnoldbooks.com. If you like this episode of Full Contact Nerd interviews so far, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you want daily book suggestions for new fiction and nonfiction studies in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, mysteries, gaming, game design, film history, and more, please check out my YouTube channel, Cris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. If you're looking for military history and general history, including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, War Scholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for space history and the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. Now back to the video.
what research did you do for this book to write it, if any?
Yeah, no, I definitely did. It's funny. 4 books in now, I've found the research process to be different. I do have some friends who write historical fiction, and they have a very sort of regimented research process in terms of how many years they spend researching a book based on what histories and what countries, and there's sort of a formula is not the right word, but something like that, that they know what they're getting into before they tackle a research.
Mhm.
For me, it's been different with every book. With this book, research really came down to um, setting, researching the place that they were going to be. I guess that's one of the great things about it being sort of sci-fi is you don't have to explain all of the science. I could kind of get away with them, and also like the characters themselves don't fully understand a lot of the things that are going on. So if you want to really like call it sort of an immersive experience for the readers, it's okay with me if the readers aren't totally sure. It's almost like putting you in the position of the characters in the books. But yeah, for research with this book, it really was. I went to New Hampshire twice. I'd been before. My wife has family that lives in Maine, and we've driven up there a few times, and we've flown up there a few times and spent some time with her family and their amazing house in the mountains. And
Mhm.
so I had kind of had that setting kind of instilled earlier.
Mhm.
Um, and then I knew I wanted it to be, the majority of the book takes place in the woods, and I prefer like a wintry atmosphere, I think. So I knew I wanted it to be kind of in the north, and I knew it needed to end at a sort of a bigger city that had a river. So I kind of backed into it that way, and I landed on Manchester, New Hampshire, as the sort of the anchor
Mhm.
for the ending of the book, and then had to kind of figure out leading into Manchester where were they going to be coming from.
Mhm.
Um, and so then took a couple of trips up there and kind of walked along the Merrimack River, starting north of Concord, kind of all the way down into Manchester, and just spending some time in that space. And you can start with Google Earth,
Mhm.
but for me, it you can't end there.
Mhm.
It's fine. It's almost like a paint by numbers. I feel like on the internet you can kind of get all the shapes where they need to go, and then
Mhm.
you have to go to the place to fill in all the colors. And
Right.
a great example of that during my second research trip, as I was walking the river. Um, I don't remember if it was north or south of Concord, but I think it was in Concord proper. But I'm right there on the river. You're right in the woods, and then I kind of stumble across this. It's a strip mall, but it was
Mhm.
like the back of it was facing the river. So I was like, well, let me walk around to the front and see what these shops are, so I can write them into the book, and it'll be all the more accurate. And I circle the shops, and I see there's a Books a Million there, and I was like, oh, this is too good. It's like the ultimate wish fulfillment. Of writing your characters stumbling across a giant abandoned bookstore. So I
Yeah.
so I kind of adjusted the timeline a little bit because I was like, well, they've got to spend the night in this place. And I do kind of make it sort of miraculously intact. Most places are just like totally devastated,
Mhm.
and but yeah, so that was a really fun thing that whole scene came together only because I went up there and walked that path. So So research really was just about going there and kind of immersing myself in the setting.
So I noticed, so with this book and one of your previous books deals with, I guess, Ugandan people who had been in an African civil war, um,
Yeah, the Republic of the Congo and Kids of
Congo.
Appetite. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm wondering, are you drawn to sort of people or devastated background, apocalyptic kind of settings? Are you drawn to that, or is it just more dramatic to write about?
I hadn't really considered that, and the with Kids of Appetite and the characters you're referring to, that came about because I was friends with some people who had escaped that civil war,
Hmm.
and they were refugees for a little while. And I remember I actually worked with dear friend Gigi Kinzunza is her name, and I worked with her for a few years, and she would talk often about the misconceptions of where she was from, and
Hmm.
people kind of assuming that it was one thing when in fact they quite loved their life there. They
Hmm.
were forced out, and it became, I don't know what, I'm not sure what it is today, but at the time it was a war zone and they had to get out.
Hmm.
um, so for me that was more of a character based research, and uh, being sure that I was telling their story respectfully and accurately.
Hmm.
Whereas with this, it was very much sort of immersing myself more in the setting.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah.
Okay. Okay. Um, so tell me some of the things that generally inspire you, and that could be books, movies, TV, music.
Sure. I mean, I was a musician for 10 years in Nashville, and was actually a working musician when my wife and I found out that we were going to have a baby.
Hmm.
And that really was what turned me to writing books because, I say working musician, I was, but it was freelance work. And my wife had this great job with, benefits, and she had the adult job. We can put it
Uh-huh.
that way, I think.
Uh-huh.
And so it was decided pretty quickly that I was going to be a stay-at-home dad, and that was when I realized, I had a home studio at the time. I was recording music for people, and you can't record music while you're taking care of an infant.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so that's really when I got serious about writing books. But yeah, so music for sure, and I come up with. I don't think I don't come up with playlists for my books or my characters so much as I come up with atmospheric playlists, I think. So
Hmm.
Johan Johansson was a big influence, and also I listened to his music constantly while writing. I never know how you pronounce her name. It's another Icelandic musician, Hildur Gudnadottir. She
Hmm.
did the score for Joker and a number of other things. But so I tend to find like atmospheric. Just in the last few years, I've really gotten into music, instrumental music. Max Richter, and a wonderful band called Slow Meadow.
Hmm.
So yeah, those are musicians for sure that inspire me. And then look, I love Christopher Nolan movies. I
Uh-huh.
love mind bendy kind of time twisty. I just watched Tenet, and don't ask me if I understood it because I didn't at all, but I definitely enjoyed it.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think that's really, that's part of when I'm reading Ted Chiang. I mean, that's the same feeling I get, which is I'm not fully connecting all of these threads, but I trust as I'm reading this book, I trust that he's connecting the threads, and I'm able to kind of just let go and enjoy the experience.
Hmm.
And I think that was definitely a North Star for me with this book in particular, because it does, I mean, it's four nonlinear timelines, and it jumps around a lot, and especially kind of, actually, one of the trade reviews called the book perplexing yet satisfying, and I thought
Hmm.
that's what I'm going for. I'm okay. That's good. I'm good with that.
Cool.
I'm okay with people not fully connecting all of the threads, but I do hope that they're able to kind of trust that I have, and that it's, that it can be an enjoyable experience in that regard.
Hmm.
But yeah, book wise, I mean, Station 11 is a great. I mean, that book certainly opened. I won't say it. I mean, I'd read post-apocalyptic before that book, but just in terms of being able to tell like smaller character-driven stories with the backdrop of this enormous scope was something that I hadn't seen done before, and it was just very inspiring.
Hmm.
Certainly with this book, Ling Ma's Severance is another great example. What I really love about post-apocalyptic fiction is you know, as opposed to apocalyptic fiction, post-apocalyptic fiction sort of inherently shifts the conversation away from what happened, right? You're not dealing with how the world ended. You're
Hmm.
dealing with who survived and how are they navigating a new world. So
Hmm.
it sort of inherently shifts the conversation away from plot and onto character. And likewise, I think it also inherently adds a little bit of hope because you're moving out of the um, are we going to survive the end of the world into okay, we've survived it, now
Hmm.
what kind of mode. And yeah, there are still plenty of dangers and things to try to survive, but I think that's probably why I'm drawn to post-apocalyptic literature.
Hmm.
So
So the cataclysmic event in your book, I believe, is a plague that struck people, which isn't, plagues are not uncommon, in apocalyptic ideas, but considering COVID right now, how are your feelings about COVID happening as you released a book with this?
yeah, really interesting. My publisher Penguin had picked February 2021 as the release month by at least February of 2020, if not prior to that. I mean, the way publishing works, everything is about a year out.
Hmm.
Um, and so we had that date for a long time. And as I said, I've been kind of working on and off on this book since 2013 and then getting really serious about it in 2017. And so, yeah, the timing of this has been very just, yeah, bizarre. And I will say I'm grateful for a number of things, but one of them is that I talked about the difference between apocalyptic fiction and post-apocalyptic. If I had written a book about the end of the world, I'm
Hmm.
not sure how I would feel, or if I would have even uh, let myself. I may have just said, "Look, we got to shut it down for a little bit and wait." I'm not saying that's definitely what I would have done,
Hmm.
but I would have at least seriously considered it. So I think part of why, you know, the book, as I said, it takes place 20 years after the apocalypse, and it does get pretty dark. It goes to some dark places, but I think my hope is that there is hope, and that a reader would feel some sense of hope themselves as they're reading it.
Hmm.
Uh, I found myself actually 2019 was a really hard year for me. I had spent a couple of years working on this book and nothing else. And I'm a pretty obsessive type A creative. So when I get a hold of an idea, I just kind of jump all in. And in this case, I had really it was not a healthy balance.
Hmm.
And the end of 2019, I actually landed in the ER with some pretty serious issues. And that was really for me. I've heard my whole life and knew that it was true. The ways that your mental health and physical health are interrelated,
Hmm.
interconnected. But I hadn't experienced that firsthand until the end of 2019, and so yeah, that was a tough thing for me. But I do feel like I say all that to say, the book does get pretty dark and it gets pretty heavy, but as the things start to build and everything starts to come together, I felt my characters kind of moving toward hope
Hmm.
and was able to kind of move that way with them, I think.
Hmm.
And my hope is that the readers are able to do that as well. So
Hmm.
um, I'm proud that it's coming out now. Actually, I definitely had my concerns, but as we've gotten into this more and more, um, I've been drawn to fiction that does that, and I guess my hope is that this can be a book
Hmm.
um, that does that as well.
So, and I don't want to ask details about what you went through, but do you feel like in your life, have you experienced things that as you wrote, you thought, wow, I don't think I would have written this as as I'd like to if I hadn't experienced this. What I would have gotten it wrong if I hadn't experienced it before.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, it was such an immersive process, and I think the book is what it is in part because it was such an immersive process. So it's hard to wish it away,
Hmm.
or to wish that it hadn't have happened like that.
Right.
Um, but also, I never think it's never good to sacrifice your health for your art,
Hmm.
and that's not. Um, yeah, I mean, I've talked about my wife and kid a little bit. I mean, they were my saving graces through that and kind of helped me find, therapy and medication and kind of getting myself more balanced out and realizing, yeah, that what I had done and what I had allowed, the isolation that I had kind of fallen into,
Mm.
wasn't okay. And I guess, to put an ironic twist on it, that I discovered that at the end of 2019, and so then leading into 2020, um, as far, we've been pretty serious about quarantining and not leaving the house, and
Mhm.
I've actually felt less isolated, to be quite honest, because my wife's job's been great. So she's been working from home. My kid has been in virtual school. So whereas before I would be home all day by myself working, I now I now have them here with me all day, every day too. So
Mm.
um, yeah, I don't know. My hope is that moving forward, I can find a way to continue immersing myself into the project, but not so much so that I lose sight of some important things.
Yeah. So, you did you sort of anticipated one of my questions. Maybe you can elaborate on it. If this book had a soundtrack, say if it were a movie, what
Mm,
sort of soundtrack would it have? What sort of feel?
yeah, so I would start with Johan Johansson, who he scored Arrival, and Theory of Everything, and I'm forgetting some big ones. I've got a playlist of his music, so I don't go to his records. I just play my Johan Johansson playlist.
Right.
Hildur Guðnadóttir, I'm totally butchering her name, but she's brilliant. Um, yeah, I think just the really atmospheric, like a Hammock. There's a band called Hammock that's
Mm.
fantastic. It's still, there's melody there. It's not just noise, but it is very atmospheric. I think it would fit at home if you were in a cabin and it was snowing outside and kind of bleak, but also just like a little bit of hope. Not unlike the book.
Mhm.
um, so, and it's funny. I'm gonna look at my phone, not to do anything other than remember the name of this guy. What's
You
his
wanna get it
name? Like,
right?
right. William Basinski. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
No.
I just discovered him the other day. He's an audio, well, as I understand it, he was an audio engineer for years, and he discovered some old loops on actual tape, but the tape was disintegrating,
Mhm.
and so he repurposed it into like soundscapes with this
Okay.
disintegrating tape. So the tracks are actually called disintegrating loops, and they're just these haunting kind of atmospheric melodies. So yeah,
Huh. I wanna check that out.
it's very cool.
Um, so actually I wanted to ask it since, did you write lyrics as a musician, or was it just the music part?
No, I did both. I was in a few bands, and I would write songs primarily with another one of the other members of the band. The two of us would write most of the music and lyrics, and then I had some solo projects where I would write music, and um, but I also did film scoring and I mean independent film scoring, and then youth camp videos, and it was freelance work, and I had a home studio, so basically whatever paid at the
Mhm.
time, and it was a fun job. It's funny though, after when I transitioned into writing books, I really, we moved houses, and I don't have a studio in our current house.
Mhm.
But I've recently kind of, I can feel myself in these, after years away from it. I've recently had some ideas, music ideas, and I feel like I might be trying to figure out a way to get back into that space, because I do kind of miss songwriting a little bit.
Mm.
It's just really interesting because I would have said for years that I didn't miss songwriting, because I feel like what I do now sort of scratches the same itch. I mean, for me, it was always about the creation of the thing,
Mhm.
and that's what I'm still doing that. So I don't feel like I've left anything necessarily, but yeah, I don't know that I'm done with that space, and for a long time I thought I was.
Mm.
So yeah.
Interesting. So this book is for young readers. Are your other books for young readers at all as well, or?
So I'm going to very, very politely correct you here, and
Mhm.
it's actually not a correction of you. I mean, it's not just you. There
Yeah.
is a, there is a, I have sort of a personal issue with the idea of prescribing books for ages. There was a really interesting article that came out recently about why adults should be reading picture books, and I
Mm,
loved it. And I absolutely agreed with it. I don't think that any book is for any particular age. Certainly, I don't write books that way.
mm.
So, but yes, and I hope I didn't come across as sounding like a jerk just then.
No, no, not at all.
Um, it's certainly they market it as that. It's for teens, or it'll, and that's fine. That's great. I love teen readers. I love talking with teen readers. They're some of the most curious, excited. Yeah, it's fantastic. The emails that I get from them, it's just wonderful. But
Mm,
I very much feel like I write books about teens. I don't think I write books for teens.
mm,
And I've had the privilege of meeting some incredibly smart book people, librarians, booksellers, publishers, editors, and I leave it to them to decide where to put a book on a shelf
mm,
and who to try to sell it to.
mhm,
I just try to tell the best stories that I can,
mm.
and yeah, I do think I also love getting emails from adults who say, I'm not your target demographic, but I loved your book. And I'm like, I don't have a target demographic, and thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, no,
um,
a lot of fantastic sci-fi and fantasy has been, quote, written for young readers, and it is still
right.
beloved by everyone. You know.
Coming of age stories, like what could be more universal, idea. We're either there or we've been there. And
Mhm,
um I'm drawn to those stories for sure. And that's the reason, I've never sat down and thought, okay, I'm going to write a young adult novel now.
mhm,
That these are the stories that I'm drawn to, and I think a lot of it is because I love coming of age stories, and a lot of it is because I have visceral memories of my teen years.
mhm.
It's funny, I'm one of three. I have two brothers, and whenever we talk about our teenage years, they're both like, I don't know, like I don't remember. I'll talk about this thing that happened, and they're like, yeah, I just don't know, I don't remember. And I'm like, how could you not remember that? Or I was talking about with my wife the other day, our kid who is almost 9.
Mhm.
He is starting to get in that place where he's like really embarrassed by us, like
Oh,
just at all. He's just embarrassed. Like even we'll be home alone and he'll just be like, Dad, you're embarrassing me. And I'm like, there's no one here. There's no one around. Um, but it's funny. I remember that. I remember that feeling like so vividly of just being so embarrassed and just for them, like not even for myself, just so embarrassed for my parents to be acting that way.
mm.
So I don't know. I do remember those years viscerally, and I wonder sometimes if that's partly why I end up writing so many teenagers in my novels.
Mm.
I'm speaking with David Arnold, author of The Electric Kingdom. You can find more information about his work at davidarnoldbooks.com. If you like this episode of Full Contact Nerd interviews so far, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you want daily book suggestions for new fiction and nonfiction studies in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, mysteries, gaming, game design, film history, and more, please check out my YouTube channel, Cris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. If you're looking for military history and general history, including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, War Scholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for space history and the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. Now back to the video.
So, actually, what I was asking with that question is, did editors want you to write to a certain reading level, or cut out, no curse words, or don't use these words, that sort of thing? Did you have to deal with that?
Right. No, not at all. And in fact, I feel like, I'm trying to remember back. My first novel came out in 2015, and I think that was, I don't know. I'm not gonna say definitively that's when things were changing, because that's really when I came into the game. So it feels for me like everything was changing, but maybe it wasn't. And what do I know? But I will say I've just been so fortunate. My publishers and my editors have just been, um, they have a very long leash in terms of content and what they they've just been, I spent 10 years banging my head against a wall trying to make music work
Hmm.
and kind of working really hard to carve out this one little space that sort of was working, and that for me at least it would have been good enough to just stay there.
Hmm.
And publishing has just been a completely different experience. It's, I knocked on the door and it's just been, welcome and come on in,
Hmm.
and they've been fantastic. So yeah, it's hard to know. I don't know if I don't hear any stories of other authors saying that they've had to rein in their content. I think most publishers and editors are just interested in telling, what's right for these stories and these characters. And there may be some books, certainly if you're talking with like middle grade books, I know there's a lot more about content, what's allowed and what's not, or what's appropriate and what's not. But
Hmm.
once you get into YA anymore, I feel like it's just a lot more about what's true to this story. And if you're cursing left and right and it doesn't make sense, then let's bring it in. But I haven't heard any stories of editors doing that you know just because it's inappropriate or they're trying to keep the content down or anything.
Hmm. Okay. So let me turn to your writing process, and I know you said you get a little ultra focused on writing, but um, would you say there's anything out of the ordinary that you do to complete drafts or the final work?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it takes me, if I had to pinpoint an average, this book took a little bit longer, um, for a number of reasons, but on average, it takes me 2 to 2.5 years to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say one of the things that I do, I don't remember when I started this is the thing. I look back and I don't remember what transpired to compel me to do this, but I walk, or we have a really, it saved us during quarantine, just a very walkable neighborhood. So we're walking either as a family or solo all the time. And I started getting into listening to these Benedictine monks.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's sort of like a meditative practice. It's a podcast from this monastery in the French countryside, and every day they just have tons of content, and it's just these monks coming together to chant. And there is something not just in the chanting that I find centering. There is also an element of feeling small in the world
Mm-hmm.
that grounds me, that these monks were doing this morning in France.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and 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 feeling the sort of how ancient that is, and then feeling it. I don't know, I find that to be a very balancing, centering practice. So I've been doing that for years now, and um, I don't anticipate stopping anytime soon. So
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of, that's not really writing process, but it is
Oh,
something, it's a practice that I've gotten into, that when I get stuck in my writing, or um, I mean, it is a daily practice, but certainly walking and listening to these monks are an integral part of what I do.
mm-hmm. As a musician, do you ever write segments of your novels and read them out loud and try to get a feel for the cadence?
Yeah, the musicality of language is so important, right? I hate the sound of my own writing. I hate the sound of my own voice, actually. I'll never listen to this podcast because I'll just want to jump into my earphones and punch myself. That I'm sure it's a lovely, just it'll be great, I'm sure, and you're great, and I just can't listen to my. But it's funny, it's not just my own voice. I know that's not an uncommon thing. I've been very fortunate with the voice actors who have done the audiobooks for my books. And I'll listen to enough because Penguin always kind of says, well, here are some actors we're thinking of working with. Here are some clips. What do you think? And they've been great about kind of letting me have a vote on who I would love to work with. And these actors do great jobs, but I'll get like a few pages in and I can't do it. And it's so, even when it's a voice that I love and it's doing a terrific job, there's something about hearing my own words that I don't enjoy. So a book very much feels, well, when it's done, and I feel very finished, and I don't go back and read it or anything like that. As I go along, there are times when I'll read it aloud just to kind of hear how they sound.
Mhm.
Um, but no, and I have some friends who read everything out loud, and that helps them and really it works for them, and that's great. But I think most of it just happens in my head.
Are you sort of always editing your own work even when it's finished, or you're listening to it? Are you thinking, oh, I could have done that better? And
That's probably part of it. Is as you go along. Yeah, what is I mean the painting is never finished, only art is never finished, only abandoned. Is that the
yeah,
saying? I mean, that's very. I've found that to be very true. If I go back to it, I'm going to want to redo it. And at some point, you just kind of have to draw a line in the sand and say, no, you're done.
mm-hmm.
So, but I am constantly, in terms of process and editing, I do kind of have some sort of hybrid of edit as I go.
Mm,
I don't try to perfect the pages as I'm going, but I also can't just dump it and go and just go on without looking. So I do some sort of a hybrid, I think, of kind of revising a little bit as I go, with the understanding that I'm going to want to go back and potentially rewrite the whole thing. But
mm,
I'm incapable of just word dump, move on, word dump, move on. But
mm.
again, that works for a lot of writers. There's no one way to do it. So
Did you feel that same way with your music? I mean, did you feel that same stress in a sense?
yeah, I'm trying to think back to when I used to record every day, it was a building process. I would start with sort of the bones of the song. I guess there are a lot of ways that they're very similar. I would write on guitar, and then usually record the guitar part first, and then kind of build. That was the benefit of having a home studio, and I was never you know an expert at any of the instruments, but I could sort of play all of them.
Hmm.
So I would write on guitar, record the guitar, and then kind of build the song in the studio that way. Um, yeah, I guess, and certainly I think there are some elements in writing books that are similar, in terms of kind of coming up with some structure and then filling it in as you go.
Hmm. But can you go back and listen to your own music that you've created in the past?
Yes, not all of it.
Yeah.
There are some songs that I'm really proud of, and that generally isn't that. Yeah, I guess I don't have the same. That's interesting because you would think I would. I sing on some of them, and um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what that is. I think it's a little bit different with music for some reason. If it's a song that I feel like has aged well over time, and that I'm proud of the recording of, yeah, I could listen to it again, and it wouldn't be a problem.
Hmm. Okay. So
You're
this,
digging up a lot of new things. So I haven't thought about any of that before. That's really I'm gonna have to think more about
well,
that.
I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so this is your fourth novel that you've put out. How has your approach to writing changed from the first to this one, if it has?
Yeah. I think it's always hard. You when you finish a novel, it feels very much like you've climbed a mountain,
Hmm.
and so then it's inevitably it's that question of, well, what's next? And you're like, no, I just climbed the mountain. Like, what else do you want from me? You're
Yeah.
like, oh, there's another mountain over there, and it feels like kind of starting over. So it doesn't get easier. I think there is a little bit of relief just in the knowledge of having been here before,
Mhm.
and when the panic sets in of, I'm never going to be able to do this again, this idea is not nearly as good as the last one, I
Mm.
hate these characters because I love the last characters and I hate these. And that, like, now that I've done that 4 times and I recognize that I say the same things at the beginning, at
Mm.
the end of every project I say the same things, and at the beginning of every project I say the same things. And my wife is happily points that out. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but you said that last time too. So I guess you do have the benefit of experience and of having kind of looking around and being like, okay, I don't remember how to get out of here, but I do remember that I've been here before,
Mm.
and knowing that you did get out of it, and um, or climb the mountain, or whatever metaphor you want to use.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I guess that's the only way it's changed, is that I'm able to kind of recognize the places that I'm in because I've been in them before now. So
Mhm. Um, what part of the process? So you've described the process, and it feels like a very uh, it's a process that takes a lot out of you,
Yeah.
is what I'm getting. So what part of it do you like?
So that's really funny because I guess it's true. It does when you I like most of it actually.
Oh, okay.
I love that I get to do this work, and it is hard and challenging, but I am entirely unqualified to do anything else. Um, yeah, I was not a good student. I did not like school. I don't have any other interests. When I was in music, it's funny because when I look back now, it was my goal was never to be. I joke that I was in Nashville to be a rock god, and I guess that's true in as much as I loved a few of the bands I was in and I wanted them to succeed. But if you're to ask me my real goal, it was never, to 200 or 300 days a year, or to write, or to produce a double platinum album. Like, those were never my goals. My goal was always to find a way to make a living, by creating, and the fact that I am now here doing that is, it's not lost on me how lucky I am, and just how fortunate I am that I get to do this, and that I found this thing that I think we toss around the word calling, and I do feel like this is what I was made to do, and I'm happy. I'm so happy I get to do it. Yeah, that doesn't mean that it's all rainbows and sunshine, um, but yeah, I mean, I just love, you know, writing is often, it's just like putting words on a page that you feel like anybody could write. You're like, this isn't very good. And what makes something good is when it is when you write something and you're like, that's me. That's something that came out of me that no one else could have done. And when that happens, it's so magical and so special, and just there's really nothing else like it. So
Hmm,
yeah,
very good
I
point.
do. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but
No, I felt bad because when you asked it, I realized I've made this sound like just a torturous process, and it isn't always. There were parts of Electric Kingdom that definitely were, and but yeah, no, I love that I get to do this. I love my job.
so obviously we've talked about the musical work you've done. Have you done any other work outside of writing that's impacted how or what you write?
To some extent, yeah, I'm trying to think of how to say this without just sounding like a total cliche.
Yeah.
It all kind of goes into the stew, right? I mean, everything that all of your experiences and all of your jobs, and I look back at all these jobs that I had. Some of them I hated. Some of them actually were quite fun. I got to be a preschool teacher for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and it started as a part-time thing while I was doing music, and then it became a full-time thing, and the music picked back up, and it went back to a part-time thing, and I just loved hanging out with kids. And that was a really fun job, and I don't think there are direct ways that has related to what I do now, but certainly that helped shape who I am as a person.
Mhm.
um, and and I guess it all kind of goes into making your own unique worldview. um, and really writing, I said this a little before, but like, I mean, it's about voice, and about your own voice, and all of the things that you've been through, and all of your jobs. Kind of, God, this all just sounds so cliche. I hate that I'm even saying them, but it's true. It's like, I don't know. There are a lot of jobs I had that I hated, but also, and I'm not going to badmouth them, but all of those things went into, you know to who I am, and yeah, I don't think I would, if I took any of those things out, I think my books would be different.
Mhm.
um so
So as a writer with sort of the mentality of observing your world and writing about it, how, so dealing with the preschool kids, did you notice any stresses or, because you have young characters in your books, did you take anything away as far as the stresses they felt about life? Any aspects of that?
I was mostly dealing with like 4 and 5 year olds
Mm.
when I was in preschool.
Okay.
And I will say, it's funny. I said what I just said before, though, I think is not true about there not being a direct tie to the preschool world. I mean, really, one of the things that led me to writing, and I was still in music, so I wasn't serious about writing books
Mm.
yet. But I remember reading some of these picture books, and just thinking I could do this. I mean, and that's like, right, that's, we've all kind of been there. Anybody who's read to a kid before, and by the way, there's nothing harder than writing a good picture book. And there are many out there, and I'm friends with a lot of picture book authors who I have the utmost amount of respect for, because being able to create a story in so few words is just it's a really unique skill. And my hat's off to them. But there were a number of years there where I think publishers were a little more lenient about what they were publishing,
Hmm.
and in the picture book world. And so then the market just got flooded with all of these just horrible picture books. And I was reading many of those, and that did kind of lead me to say, well, maybe I should write some picture books. And so then I would try that. And then that got me, actually, I joined a group called the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And that's where I met my people, the writers who I'm friends with to this day, and kind of got an education and a writing community there, so that when I did get serious about writing, I
Hmm.
didn't feel like I was just floating in the middle of the ocean. I was like, oh yeah, no, I have these friends here who are doing this. And so yeah, there was actually kind of a direct correlation between that job and what I do.
Hmm.
Go ahead.
So to step back to the book, when it was edited, when you sent it in to the editor, were there major parts that were taken out? Was it too long and it had to be chopped down, or maybe bulked up?
Yeah, so the really interesting thing about, I would say probably the most common misconception about the editing process
Hmm.
is that it's completely separate. That you write the book and then the editor does the editing.
Hmm.
And in my experience, at least, uh, you know, with the exception of your debut novel, because that really is, you have to do the whole thing all on your own and then try to sell that book. And so it's got to go through all these rounds of revision, and you do all of that either by yourself, or if you have a critique group or a critique partner, but it's all peers, your peers. And with the exception of your debut novel, um, my last three books, Electric Kingdom, maybe especially even,
Hmm.
um, it's been, you work hand in hand. It's hard. I mean, yes, I get an edit letter, so I'll do a draft, and sometimes that takes a year or more, and then my editor will read it, and then I'll get an edit letter. But the letter isn't about what I should or shouldn't change.
Hmm.
It's basically letters that kind of give me a lot of things to consider, just in terms of character motivations, ways to enhance things. And yeah, it's not. Um, yeah, I don't know. It feels very much like a tandem, if kind of
Hmm.
process.
Interesting.
So especially so with Electric Kingdom. I mean, again, with the three, four, if you count the prologue, nonlinear points of view. My editor at Viking, Dana Ladig, I would never have been able to write this book without her. And it was just hours and hours on the phone trying to figure out how to bring the pieces of the puzzle together. And
Hmm.
actually, I think probably a good parallel to make would be in film. I mean, if you think about a director, you've got a team, right? You've got a producer, you've got an editor, you've got a director, you've got the actors, you've got the writers, and they're all kind of coming together to make this thing the best thing that it can be.
Hmm.
um, and there are fewer people involved in the creation of a book,
Hmm.
but I do feel like the writer and the editor, that relationship is more of a kind of, it's kind of happening at once. Again, this is just in my experience. That may not be true for everyone, but
Hmm. Interesting. So now a bit of a whimsical question. Um, when you were younger, was there any power, technology, or fictional setting that you yearned to have or be part of?
oh man. Well, I was obsessed with the book Jurassic Park, so I
Uh,
guess, I actually, in seventh grade, I literally read the cover off of my paperback, my mass market paperback, Jurassic Park, which I still have on my shelf, has no cover on it, because I would finish it, I would just go back and read it again.
wow.
um, so maybe Jurassic Park would be the answer. That park.
Oh, okay.
um, I guess that's a tech. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of a, um, I don't know if counts as a technology or not.
No, it fits.
But also kind of putting my life in danger there. But yeah, no, I was so obsessed with that book.
So you want it to be in the park, not necessarily in the past with dinosaurs. It was the park itself.
Right. No, it was the park, and there was something about that park too that they were in those cars that were on the tracks, and I don't know, there was something about it that just seemed so magical and wonderful, and I don't know, yeah. Or I mean, you could also say what's the mixed up files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler. I feel like that was just talk about wish fulfillment, getting to sleep in and live in the museum, and
Hmm.
I guess for me it was Jurassic Park kind of had there was a similar feeling there if the museum came alive and was going to eat you,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on the movies at all?
I loved the first one, and I still, I mean, I had the poster. A friend of mine, I'll never forget. You want to talk about the visceral memories of my childhood that
Hmm.
I mentioned before. I mean, Jurassic Park is right up there. My friend and I went, and we went to see the movie in theaters probably 4 or 5 times, and we were both. It was a mutual obsession, the two of us, and
Yeah.
then we bought. I remember staring at the poster that had the announcement of the day the VHS was going to come out,
Yeah.
and I don't remember I don't know if you could even pre-order a VHS, but if you could, I did, and if you couldn't, I went and bought it the day of, and I remember watching it on my little TV, and
Hmm.
yeah, I loved the first one. I'm not going to comment on the other ones. I don't think I don't have enough of. I mean, I think I know I've seen a couple of them, but they don't seem very memorable. So
Hmm. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, so what's your current writing project, if you want to talk about that?
so I can't say too much about it. Um, Partly because yeah, I can't say too much about it.
Okay.
It's a little bit of I needed to do something a little more lighthearted.
Hmm.
But it isn't, I don't know if you would count it as sci-fi. So I think it would be like a um speculative romance, maybe you would call it, although it's not a rom-com. Yeah, I don't really know how to talk about it yet. I'm enjoying writing it, and hopefully there'll be some kind of an announcement sooner rather than later, and then I'll be able to talk about it a little bit more openly at that point. So
Did you have any trouble getting a publisher for this novel, or was it pretty much a
you know
given?
I've yeah, I've just been so fortunate to be part of the same team since the beginning. Now I worked with, Ken Wright is the publisher at Viking, and he and another brilliant editor named Alex Juliet, the two of them worked. I worked with them for the first 3 books, and then Alex left publishing altogether, and that's when Dana Laydig came on board, and just equally brilliant and fantastic, and Ken has been part of all 4 projects, and Viking and Penguin in general has just been great. I feel very much like at home there, and they've just been really wonderful in kind of letting me create these stories, and hopefully I'll be able to continue doing that with them.
Hmm. Hmm. Where can people find you online? You have website, social media?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm at davidarnoldbooks.com,
Hmm.
and I'm on Instagram at I am David Arnold.
Okay. And that's spelled standard David and then Arnold.
That's correct.
Did I get that right? Yeah.
You got it. Yeah, you got it.
All right. All right. That's all the questions I have. Do you have any final thoughts or words?
No, that was a great conversation. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. I appreciate you talking with me. It was great.
Thanks, Cris.
In the next episode, I speak with Hadas Avaram about British urban fantasy. Hit the subscribe button to catch that interview. Thank you for watching this video version of Full Contact Nerd Interviews. If you liked the episode, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you'd like more book suggestions or information on fiction and storytelling, including sci-fi, horror, fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, film history, gaming, and more, please check out my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, my YouTube channel, Chris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. If you're looking for military history and general history, including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, War Scholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for space history and the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. Thank you for watching, and keep imagining the past, the present, and the future.